This is a Q Media production.
Hi, and welcome to Leading Change. If you've been following me on social media, you'll know that over the last few months, I have been traveling everywhere across the world. I have been to Singapore and London and Dubai and even Bali for a conference. And in all of those places, I have been meeting with clients and with industry peers, and I've been asked a lot of really interesting questions. And what I thought we'd do for today's episode is I have compiled all of these really cool questions that I have been asked, and I will share them here with you today and what I think about it. Our first question comes from a lady who said to me, "Our company has been facing high employee turnover. It's been impacting morale, and some of my colleagues are thinking of leaving. What can we do?" So turnover is a really big issue for organizations, and it actually costs companies anywhere between 50 to 150% of a person's salary to replace them. So just to grab a round number, if somebody's salary is $100,000, to replace that person, it can cost anywhere from $50,000 to $150,000 on top of the new person's salary. And those costs come in all different ways, whether it is costs of recruitment, costs of training, lost opportunity costs. So there's a whole bunch of pieces that come into it, but it's not even just money costs that turnover impact. There's actually can be a huge drop in morale, a lot of confidence within the team. Sometimes you can't even apply for tenders because you don't have the right people in the right seats to deliver them. So having anyone leave your company, if they are an awesome employee, is a real big hit. So the question is, how do we reduce that? Now, the first thing we need to know is how high is high when it comes to turnover rates. Now, a normal turnover rate is somewhere between 5 and maybe 10%. You're going to have a minimum amount of turnover because people, have different things with their lives. They might leave and go traveling, or they retire. So people are going to be leaving your organization anyway. So there's about 5% in there. Up to about 10 is where we're a bit comfortable, where we expect companies to turn over. Anywhere between 10 and 18 is considered high. We really don't want to be there. It starts costing the company in IP, and it really is kind of distracting. And anything over 18 is really bad. Now, the lady who actually asked me this question, her turnover in her company was 30%. It was extremely high. And if we think about that, a third of their entire workforce left every single year. So think about that would do to your business if a third of people just up and left. So turnover is a big, big deal. So the question is, how do we fix it? So look, the first thing is we need to make sure we know where we stand. So we don't know what to do to fix it until we figure out where the problem areas are. And so what we always do in this situation is start with an employee engagement survey. I was surprised to hear that a lot of big companies don't do this, and it is absolutely the most important thing that you can do. We go into organizations and we will run a survey of all of their employees, and depending on how big the company is, will often depend on how deep and in-depth the questions are and how many. And what we do is we get answers around different categories, around how they feel about leadership and whether they have professional development or whether they feel supported. And there's a whole bunch of categories that we ask about. But on top of those answers, we actually ask them to write some answers as well. So we have qualitative and quantitative data that we work with. And when we get these survey results, we suddenly see the picture. It becomes incredibly clear of where the gaps are in the organization. So how do we reduce turnover? Well, we figure out where the problem areas are first, and then we plug them. What we find is there's a few key areas that are general gotchas. The first one is around company culture. So whether that is how people behave and how people talk to one another, whether there's a culture of openness or not listening to one another. These sorts of cultural issues are generally top down and they can really infiltrate. And it's also a bit of that frog in the ocean where you might not necessarily realize what's happening until it's too late. And suddenly there's this just general feeling of uneasiness. So culture is generally a big issue. So once we get that right, then we also then need to look at how are we treating our people? Are we developing them? Are we giving them a path for promotion? Or at least if they don't want to be promoted, is there a future for them? Do we have other projects we can put them on? What are the things that our employees want and need to be fulfilled in an organization? And so this is often where we start to bring in learning and development or leadership development programs, different types of development that will actually make people feel that they're supported. The interesting thing is a lot of people actually dive deep and start in that. Where we actually need to start is people's career development plans. So if as a leader, you're not speaking to your team members regularly about what their career objectives are, where they want to go, how we think we can get there, then you actually don't know what training they're going to need. And so just a bit of a gotcha. Don't necessarily jump straight into professional development if you don't exactly know how everybody wants to be developed, and everybody's an individual. And then finally, there comes to belonging. So in an organization, we hear about, diversity and inclusion and equity, and they're all really important that we have it. But if we actually look down to the purpose of making sure that we have these types of workforces, what we're actually trying to do is create an environment where people feel like they belong, that their voice is heard, that they are listened to. And what that does is it makes people excited to get up in the morning and actually go into the office and spend more time than what they do with their actual family. And so if we can create those types of environments where we can have our employees feel like they belong, and we can achieve that by listening to them, by putting initiatives in place, whether that's work balance initiatives or any type of initiative where we might actually support our people in a way that makes them feel happy. Those are things that we should be doing to push our company forward. And the real key to this is not all of these initiatives have to cost money. So if we don't have the budget to spend on these big programs, work with your teams to figure out what are some initiatives that we can just do on our own to actually make sure that we're working together to create a place where people want to stay. Our next question is about vision, mission, and values. So, how do I know when it's time to revisit and refresh our company's vision, mission, and values? And what are the tangible benefits of doing so? There's a lot of people out there who, when you say vision, mission, and values, they roll their eyes and go, oh, this again. The fact is, having a really clear vision, mission, and values is actually one of the most important parts of running a business. The reason why is a vision will tell you where we're going to go. A mission will say how we're going to get there. And the value says how we are going to behave and work together so that we can all get there going the same way. Now, it might not seem that important. Okay, we've been hired to work for a company. Let's just get on with it. But I'm guessing that you've been in a company where not everybody behaves the same way, and there starts to be animosity. And when we start getting into a room, there's arguing. And it just doesn't feel right. And often what we find is those are companies that don't have aligned values. The other thing that we find is that we start the company and we set it all up and it feels fantastic. And these drive our brand and our behaviors. And maybe we're at a startup company and we start to grow. And then suddenly something doesn't start to feel right. And this is the time where we might need to reassess our vision, mission, and values. Because what happens is as companies grow, as our leaders change over, maybe the products or services we're selling have changed. Maybe the market has changed and our customers want different things. it's okay to pivot a little bit and revisit where we are now. So sometimes what we find is this is the time to run a vision, mission, and values session. Now, a bit of a story. I had a client and they were having some issue hiring people. They said they put out job ads and they just couldn't get anyone. They were in the marketing industry, but marketing companies, there's a lot out there. How did they stand out from the crowd? And we went in there and they thought it was, a job ad problem. And it actually wasn't. When we dug deeper, we found that what they were putting out to the world didn't reflect at all what I found in the office. They had a warm, wonderful, caring group of people who were running this business, and their job ads were cold and they didn't actually describe what they did at all. So what we did was we realized they were about a 7 or 8 year old company. We thought it was time to refresh. And so we did. And we ran the workshop to refresh vision, mission, values. And they took it and embraced it. And they put that through every single part of their business. So what they did was in their job ads, they started writing about who they are and where they're going and what type of values they want from the people they're hiring. They decided to create social media content where their employees were talking about what they do, but referencing their values. And so suddenly recruitment became a whole lot easier because everybody knew who they were. And suddenly this whole, I've applied for one job, but then I've gotten something else. It's not. We now are all understand exactly who we are. So they attracted the right people. But what was really cool was it actually got better. They actually implemented it across every single part of their business. So the HR manager took it and embraced it and wrote their values into every part of their job descriptions. And these are your KPIs now based on values. And now, when we have a conversation, maybe a difficult conversation that we don't necessarily like to have with our team members, it's no longer emotional. All we have to do is reflect back to our values and the behaviors that are expected, and it takes all of that emotion out of it, and everybody understands where we are. So, as a company, they were actually got a lot out of refreshing their vision, mission, and values, more than what they just expected. It actually went across their entire business and helped them to not only improve their employee experience, but also their customer engagement scores. So the next question talks about leadership development programs. And we do roll out some incredible leadership development programs across organizations, even globally. And so I got asked the question how we can actually use these leadership development programs to improve our culture and our performance. And that's a really important question because a lot of people go into whether it's typical training or leadership development training, and they'll often put one of their employees on a course. And the next day, they come back to the office and they've forgotten 50% of what they've learned. And then the following week, they've forgotten 90% of what they've learned. How many times have you gone to a course where you actually just don't remember what they said? And this is the problem with traditional training. And so what we have done to make leadership development programs actually work and drive the outcomes is that we have actually designed all of our programs around change. And how do we drive change through organizations? Well, we first have to look at what we're trying to achieve. At its core, change is trying to get behavior changes and mindset shifts. Okay, great. So how do we do this now through leadership development? So the way that we approach it is that we sit down with our clients and say, where are your challenge areas? Where are your gaps? Now, it could be we get a lot around communication. That is always a common denominator. We get things around critical thinking, around inclusivity and hiring the right people. There's all sorts of challenges that companies face across their leadership teams that they need to develop. And so we will speak to them about their gaps. We will look at the results of their employee engagement surveys to pick out any other themes. And with that, we design a program. Now, as I said, it's like a change program. It will last anywhere from 3 to 9 months, the average being about 5, maybe 6 months long. And the way that we do it is we have to know that the change that we're driving has return on investment. How are we going to make return on investment on a leadership development program? Well, it's quite easy, actually. What we do is we measure up front. We understand what metrics we want to measure, and we take surveys. So we survey the attendees, the participants of the program, and we also survey their managers. So we know before they even step foot in the classroom exactly where they are. We ask questions about their behaviors and the ones that their leaders see that they need to improve. And so now we know where to focus the content. Each individual program is individually designed, but depending on what you're trying to achieve, you'll get the content that you need. A lot of the courses are standard, things like unconscious bias and emotional intelligence. Those are things that every leader needs and a really great stepping stone. We almost always include communication, talking about active listening. So these are the different types of skills that we make sure that we have. But these programs are often, 3, 4, 5, 6 sessions long so that we can actually keep on learning and building that knowledge. So what are the different components to actually get culture and behavior shifts? So first of all, we have them do pre-work. So before the session, they get their brain primed, they know what they're going to learn. And then after the session, we make them do homework. So what we do is we make them think about it and then we make them practice it. And this is a really core component in actually driving change. And a lot of the activities we give them for homework include them talking to their leader or talking to their team members. And so they actually have to engage to be able to deliver that. So those are really the core components. At the end, the real special piece is that we have them do a capstone project or something at the end where they actually pull together all of the knowledge. So they actually have to reflect back at what they learned over time, like they would in a normal course. So really, it is so important to have this sort of repetition and practice all the way through. And that is the real core to a leadership development program actually driving change. So one question I get is around how to effectively team build. I get a lot of feedback. Nobody likes to do the old school types of team building, where you use like marshmallows and popsicle sticks and trust falls. Like that is so in the past. We don't do that anymore. So the question is, how do we actually build teams? And particularly since a lot of teams are actually hybrid these days, it can be really challenging for everybody to get together to be able to build teams and build trust. I think the question is why? Why does it even matter? Because leaders will often say, no, my team's fine. They're working together. They're really effective. But oftentimes it's the value that these activities bring that actually forms connections that allows your team to face the same direction and work towards. So depending on where you're seeing challenges with your team will depend on what type of workshop will roll out. We have one example where we use quite a structured approach. So we use something called a team canvas, and this is readily available on the internet. You can look it up. And basically what it is, it's almost like a one-page roadmap of what we're doing as a team. And the way that I describe it when I get a team in a room is to say, if you are running a business, you would have a business strategy and a business plan. And you would look at your strengths and you would look at your weaknesses and you'd look at where you're trying to go and your values and all of these different aspects of your business that would help you to drive the outcomes that you want to drive. Well, we do the exact same thing for teams. And so we actually start, what is the vision as a team? What are we trying to achieve? What gets you out of bed in the morning? We talk about our strengths. We talk about our goals, personal and professional. We talk about our values and what our shared values are as a team. We talk about what we need to start doing to achieve those goals and what do we need to actually leave behind. We end up with a great piece of paper and we use that piece of paper to go in and check. And you kind of look at it and say, look, it kind of ends up in the bottom drawer. Does it matter? And I say, actually, it's not about the paper. It's about the process that you went through to get there. Those 2, 3, 4 hours that we spend in the room creating this piece of paper, is some of the most effective time that you're going to spend with your team. You share your hopes and your dreams. You talk very openly with your leader in the room and talk about what they can do better. It's a safe space, but it's a place where we actually grow together and everyone leaves feeling really positive about the future. So that is a real value in team building. Now, that is the structured approach about how we can take it. We can also do something where we actually pick and choose the activities depending on the outcome that we want. So I had another client who came to me and said that they were having trouble with their team kind of engaging with each other. And when they were talking about customer service, the handoffs weren't really clear and neat. And so they didn't really know what each one was doing, and therefore it was impacting customer experience. So what we decided to do was pick and choose certain activities. So we started with some things that were a little bit fun, but then went into something we love to call a skills market, where we actually talked about the skills that each person had, and then also what skills that people wanted. And in that activity, we ended up matching up people with different skills who were able to mentor each other. So that was a huge win. We also did activities like putting yourself in the customer's shoes, and we called it an empathy map. The outcome of that particular exercise was that people finished and said, I had no idea that that's how my customer might have felt. I'm going to talk to them differently. So we did a whole series of exercises like this where they got to work together and learn and grow. But the proof is actually in the outcomes. About 3 or 4 months later, I went back to the client and I said, so what's happened since? Their employee engagement scores skyrocketed. It was the highest they'd ever been, but even better, their NPS score had gone from 6 something to 9. Incredible. Their customers were so happy working with them now. And all because all of the teams now worked better together and had more empathy for the customer. So these are some real values that we can get out of running a team building workshop. So this last question gets a little bit personal. I had run an event for women in the data center industry in Singapore a few weeks ago. And after I spoke, a woman came up to me and said, I am in a sales team, and I am the only woman in my team. And on top of that, there are no women in our senior leadership team. And so when we go in to present, I'm starting to feel like I don't have any authority, like no one's listening to me. And so I'm not actually putting myself out there anymore. And, what can I do? And it was a really difficult one because you could see how personal it got to her, how she was actually losing confidence because of the way that the people in her team were acting. And so I said to her this. I said, first of all, we can never group people, men are like this and women are like this. It's just not the case. That said, there are typical ways that sometimes we can act as a gender. And sometimes when you're not speaking up, the men don't actually notice you're not speaking up. And so while you're getting quieter, you think that they're noticing, they don't actually notice. So my advice to you is actually speak up, go hard, get your confidence back, fake it till you make it, and actually get out there in front of them and tell them what you think. Come up with a big plan or a strategy and say it loud. And you know what they're going to do? They're going to look at you and go girl, she's back. I think sometimes, and I don't know if it's a gender thing or not, but sometimes we put ourselves in a box, and sometimes we think things about ourselves that actually aren't true. And sometimes it's just about getting out there, being brave, and just trying again until we actually get our confidence back. So that's my advice to you. And that brings us to the end of another episode. If anything you heard today resonates with you, feel free to reach out and book a discovery call. There's a link in the show notes, and I look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe. Taking just 2 minutes to leave a review on Apple Podcasts would mean the world. Your reviews play a vital role in expanding the reach of this podcast and making a bigger impact.